Well, not only do I get the luxury of being chair here today, but I get to do a presentation as well, so I don't really need to introduce myself because I think I've probably done that already. So I might just get into my presentation if that's okay. Today I'm going to talk to you about cultivating coexistence. I'm going to cover a range of topics today, but I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of context around coexistence and drawing an analogy. I'm going to look at the role of the Commission in the context of coexistence and social licence and some of the state of the sector aspects, so what the economic contribution of the sector, policy drivers. And a big part of today's theme is about looking back and looking forward, so I'm just going to spend a bit of time focusing in on some of those lessons of the past and also some of those challenges and opportunities that we're likely to face and be able to harness into the future. And look at how the Commission will need to continue evolving its role, as you will all in the room, in that gas future. So, cultivating coexistence, learning from experience, facing challenges and harnessing future opportunities. The joining of the words cultivation and coexistence isn't just significant because they roll off the tongue nicely and sound snappy together. But that there are so many parallels that could be drawn between cultivating crops in an agricultural sense and cultivating coexistence between the gas industry, its host communities and landholders. The aim of cultivation in the context of cropping is all about developing and maintaining the right conditions to help a crop grow. For example, aerated soil allows your plant roots to get enough oxygen. Nutrients can increase productivity. Watering at the right time is critical for optimal growth. You also need to make sure the crop's free of weeds and has good drainage. Likewise, coexistence within the context of the onshore gas industry is about creating the right conditions for agriculture, regional communities and the industry to thrive. You can substitute that soil aeration for a robust regulatory framework, substitute nutrients for local jobs, infrastructure upgrades and community contributions. Substitute water for enduring relationships with landholders and communities based on trust and respect. And managing weeds is replaced with weeding out things like disrespect, misinformation, distrust and myth. But like agricultural cultivation, coexistence can be fickle. A crop, if not tended properly, will fail. Likewise, we must all actively continue to cultivate coexistence if we're able to ensure the continued prosperity of our gas sector, our agricultural sector, and our resource and our regional communities. So where do we fit as the GasFields Commission in this context? And why is coexistence so important? I think the Minister put it very eloquently when he talked about how critical the coexistence and social licence is to the success that we have collectively achieved and how hard we've worked for it as a group, and there's still more work to be done. Which brings me to the role of the Commission. Fundamentally, the Commission was set up with the role of managing and improving the notion of sustainable coexistence between the gas sector, regional communities and landholders. In fact, we are obliged to pursue this under our Act, the GasFields Commission Act of 2013. But it's not a statutory obligation that drives us in trying to achieve this outcome, but a drive to make a difference. The Commission's done a lot of work over the last couple of years in looking at its role and finding the sweet spot for the Commission in that coexistence space. And we've really honed it into essentially three strategic objectives which we thrive on. These relate to the facilitation, review and advisory roles. The first objective is really around facilitation of stakeholder relationships and the dissemination of information with our partners. It's really, we get information, we gather information from disparate information sources and stakeholders, collate it, get it in a fit-for-purpose state to get it to the right stakeholders. It's a tough job, there's a lot out there. You know, we're talking about research, we're talking about information about the regulatory framework, we're talking about how the industry functions. We also get in the middle of some challenging issues and seek to solve problems. We have a fundamental role in reviewing the effectiveness of implementation of regulatory frameworks that relate to the onshore gas industry. Now, most of you in the room are probably familiar with the last year's Queensland Audit Office review of coal seam gas regulation. Now, that review pointed out that the Commission hadn't been undertaking that review function, and we've made some major steps in recognising that and putting our best foot forward in terms of that regulatory role. And we've commenced a couple of really key reviews looking at, well, an easy one to start with, like the Regional Planning Interest Act, and some other things. And we're also looking at making that core business for us as the Commission. And finally, that really important advisory role. We want to be a trusted advisor, and I believe we are, to the range of stakeholders in the room, to ministers, to state agencies, to landholders, to peak bodies, to companies. We need to be there to be able to provide that advice and recommendations around coexistence, leading practice and managing the onshore gas sector. So these are all really important roles for the Commission. But if you look at them, there's one thing they all have in common. They all involve other groups. They all involve other stakeholders to deliver. The Commission is really only as successful as its relationships and partnerships with you all in the room here today. And that's why sessions like we have here today and the opportunities such as this, as they are so rare, are important. And also our day-to-day engagements. The Commission, we see, plays a key role in driving and leading the coexistence agenda, but we're all in this together. And we're relying on your collaboration, your support and your partnership to achieve our best possible outcomes. I think the Minister has also covered the notion of the economic contribution of the gas sector to the state fairly wholesomely, so I won't dwell on this, but I thought it was important that we just do cover some of that, the state of the sector statistics. And I couch them in some of the stats around the primary industry sector too, and how important the two play a complementary role in our rural and regional communities. According to the Queensland Resources Council, in the 2020 financial year, the gas industry's contribution was around $5.1 billion to state gross product, and total value added value of $11.1 billion, or 3% of GSP. Around 32,000 indirect and direct jobs, really significantly contributing to local, rural and regional employment, but as well as employment in our urban centres, including the largest resource sector centre of Brisbane. In terms of direct jobs, that number is more than around 4,500, with a total wages expenditure around $718 million. In terms of royalties, we've got $466.3 million in royalties paid in the FY20 years, contributing to critical state infrastructure and services. And finally, in terms of local spend, a total of $3.8 billion spent on local goods and services, benefiting over 2,800 local businesses and 250 community organisations. So those are significant numbers in anyone's language. But just to place that in context, according to the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries' recent Ag Trends publication, the total value of primary industries to Queensland in a similar comparison was about $8.52 billion on a value added basis. Unfortunately, I couldn't get 20 figures, but that's FY19, 2.3% of GSP. And from a jobs perspective, a very significant contributor to the primary industry sector, 120,000 direct and indirect, 41,000 individual businesses, many of them being sole traders, and also in some rural and regional centres, a direct employment proportion of up to 25%, so that's a really significant direct employment base in rural and regional areas. Look, that's not to pit agriculture and rural agriculture and primary industries against the gas sector. Far from it. It's to show and emphasise how important and how complementary the sectors are to our economy and our regional communities, and how important the coexistence of both is critical if we're to continue to grow and prosper. All right, so just quickly touch on a few policy drivers, touch on energy policy. Certainly with the collective intellectual grunt around energy policy in the room, I won't labour the point because there's many in here much more qualified than myself to speak on the matter. But I just thought it was important to couch what policies will influence a gas future for Queensland. Look, and what's been really heartening, and the Minister hit on it too, is the resilience of the gas sector in the face of COVID-19 and continued, market challenges around fluctuating oil and low oil prices. I think it's been a real testament to the sector, and the ag sector too, which has been a real bright light during COVID. Look, just on a couple of things, I think it's important to note that we are really seeing a significant shift towards the renewable energy. But I think it's clear from a supply and demand perspective that gas will continue to be a critical part of the energy mix. And we've heard a bit too also about the inputs as far as manufacturing goes and domestic manufacturing. But those policy settings are clearly reflected at a state and federal level. We see the federal government investing heavily in gas-fired recovery from COVID, with significant investment in support unlocking of gas supply. So some of the work the feds are, and some of the money that's flowing towards the new basins or developing basins in Queensland, the Bowen, the Galilee, Beetaloo in the Northern Territory. And there's a real focus there on enabling industry growth and employment. We're also seeing a strong focus at a state and federal level around increasing domestic gas supply. Certainly no surprise to anyone in the room here, and quite a controversial topic, but one that ministers have touched on as well. But suffice to say, I think in Queensland at least we've seen the successful advent of the domestic supply-only gas tenders, which has been a very successful initiative and one the gas industry's got on board with. And I think you can't dismiss how important that domestic gas issue is as it relates to the social licence piece. Affordable energy. Ensuring that we are looking after any of those challenges we have with the East Coast gas market is a really important thing, I think, from a community perspective. In a market sense, we continue to see growth. Our favourite trading partner at the moment, China, and other Asian markets. And LNG exports continue to be strong. But on the flip side, and on a social licence or on a coexistence direction, we're also seeing a continued focus on, and I'd actually argue an increased focus on our social licence aspects and coexistence. And I think that continued focus is really important if we are to realise the full opportunity of our gas resources in Queensland. I'm not wholly familiar with the topic myself, but I understand the concept of environment, social and corporate governance is one of an emerging one in the sector. And certainly one that is all about investment decisions being guided by the environmental and social credentials and corporate governance of companies. So I think with that sort of lens, I think you can see there will be an increasing focus on the environmental and social performance of companies, and that's already an area that's really heavily scrutinised. So there are a couple of drivers there on the flip side that really balance off some of those energy policy issues that will continue to see the importance of gas development in the state. So I talked a little bit about looking back, looking forward, and I know probably a number of our other speakers will focus in a bit on some of our learnings. But in preparing for today, I did a bit of looking back. Actually, before I start that, I'm going to take us back to the coexistence, the cultivation analogy, if you'll let me. I think it's fair to say that during the early days of CSG development in the Surat, we probably weren't collectively tending our coexistence crop to the best of our ability, and we probably didn't quite have that right mix of inputs at the time. And I think over the past 10, 15 years, it's fair to say that we've learnt, sometimes the hard way. I know many of us are probably bearing scars of missteps along the way, that there are a range of factors and inputs to success. And in preparing for today, I had a bit of a look back at some of the archives of the Commission, if you will. And I dusted off a 2017 publication that the Commission put out called On Your Ground. Hopefully many of you will have seen it in the room, and you've actually got a copy on the USB that you'll have at your table there. I'll talk a bit about that later. But at the time, the Commission made a few observations around learnings from up to that 2017 point. And look, it's 4 years on now, but I think it's aged pretty well, some of those observations, and I thought they were worth touching on today. So I'll just run through them verbatim. Land access is a business-to-business relationship. Again, the Minister touched on this earlier. This is all about mutual knowledge of and respect for landholder operations and the importance of minimising disturbance and impact in those considerations. Respectful conduct and behaviour on farm is critical. No, that was certainly in the early days, that was one of a very key learning that was felt the hard way, that's for sure. As is transparent approach to the provision of information and fair compensation for impact. A robust and trustworthy regulatory framework is key. A framework that covers all aspects of approvals, land access, water, environment, social, really vital. Active compliance, boots on the ground, and regular review of these frameworks, absolutely critical in building that community confidence. The gas industry must understand and take responsibility for all its impacts in the communities that it operates. It's not just about the impact on farm. There's a whole range of impacts that stem through the community. Impact on local roads, transport, community infrastructure, services, population growth, housing. Local government is the key in engagement there. Trust facts, not emotion. I think it's one that we're probably all familiar with and resonates across sectors, not just the gas sector. We've got a wealth of expertise and research and information around the safe and environmentally responsible operation of gas in Queensland, particularly through lots of investment in organisations such as the University of Queensland Centre for Natural Gas and CSIRO's Jazeera. But sharing that information is key, and openly and transparently, and translating it into easily understood language is really important. And finally, the pursuing of effective communication and engagement. You know, one of the legacies of information gaps early in the CSG days was fear and confusion. That information vacuum creates that fear and confusion. And I think we can argue that in many cases we have filled that information gap. I'm looking at Sanjeev and the Oggia team and the URA and the groundwater work that we've done. It's very much been about filling that information void. And continuing to do that and get that information out there with best available and trusted science is really important. Meaningful engagement from exploration through to decommissioning. It's not just at the development phase that we need to engage. All right, but what about looking forward? Same but different? I don't know. That's a question I'd ask all of you. Look, there's no doubt that we've seen an evolution of the gas sector with mature conventional and coal seam gas developments operating successfully across the state. The development and construction boom of the early to mid-2010s has passed, and I think it's fair to say we're probably unlikely to see development of that intensity and scale, at least in the near future. But we've got a range of opportunities and challenges ahead of us as the gas industry continues to evolve and expand. If we look at the Surat, we're certainly seeing, in terms of current activity, a focus on some new development areas and infill development. Probably some more challenges in the new areas, as that tends to be, less familiarity with the sector. And certainly in new development areas, we're witnessing challenges around some of those very closely settled and highly intensively farmed areas. The prime ag areas, the priority agricultural areas. We're seeing quite a lot of commentary in the public realm about that at the moment, and some of the challenges and some of the concerns around impact on that particularly those intensively farmed operations. But we're also seeing great opportunity there in terms of potential business-to-business relationships at that scale, and that companies and landholders can both benefit through working together. Just a comment on the interface with renewables, certainly an interesting area. A lot of diversification into the renewable energy market in the room for some of the companies, some gas companies and many other companies. And in some instances, we're seeing that co-location of infrastructure, gas, solar, wind. And look, great opportunity for diversification, but with opportunity comes challenge. We are hearing murmurings. They're probably slightly louder than murmurings around some land use conflict, whether it be between existing or potential future gas operations and solar and wind, or between agriculture and those new forms of renewable energy development. New basins, new opportunities, new challenges. As I said before, we probably won't see, Surat Basin CSG2, and a one-size-fits-all approach is not necessarily going to be the way forward. We need to learn from the past, but it's not necessarily a carbon copy approach. As we look to basins like the Bowen, the Galilee and Cooper, and they continue to develop, and as we move further afield into the northwest, we're going to have to do things differently. We're going to have new challenges, new opportunities, and require a different approach at times. And we'll need to tailor that approach to meet local community needs and aspirations, as well as industry and community characteristics. We need to be acknowledging that every community is different. And we need to understand what those issues of concern will be in those communities and what opportunities there are to value add, and do that early. No doubt these are some of the challenges that in all your respective sectors you're facing on a day-to-day basis, whether it's in your existing planning or your future planning. Just a quick comment on production techniques and targets. I think there's a lot of information out there about conventional and CSG, but we're probably scratching the surface with some of the other forms of unconventional gas development. I'm sure there's lots of research out there, but I'm not sure we're communicating it yet. I'm talking specifically about some of our deeper targets, shale and tight gas. Again, I think it's learning from the past where we had those information gaps with other forms of gas development. How can we fill that void, or if it exists, and how do we get that information out early? It's really about building that community confidence. So ultimately, as I said, cultivating coexistence, it's going to require some of the same inputs, but it's also going to require some new and innovative approaches. Just like agriculture, there's always R&D happening, there's always new technologies. We're going to have to apply that same philosophy in the way in which we work with communities and engage. So where does the Commission sit in that evolution? I think we've got a demonstrated track record as a Commission in supporting the onshore gas industries and promoting coexistence, delivering value through our unique and independent role and function. We are a unique entity nationally. There is no other jurisdiction that has an independent of government advisorial body like the Commission. We're proud of that. It's cited as best practice in terms of frameworks nationally. I think we got a gong in the recent Productivity Commission review of resource sector regulation. So that's a really important role that we play, and I think a value that the Commission has demonstrated over the years. We're looking at nearly 12 years, nearly 10 years in operation, I think, next year. But like the evolution of the gas sector, we need to evolve as an organisation, as I'm sure you all are in your respective organisations. And what that evolution will look like, I don't know. We've spent 2 years on that evolution and to reach where we are, and we're still working through that as an organisation, and it's a continual learning approach. But what we will do is we'll build on the foundations of what we've got in the Commission. We've built a foundation as an honest broker, ensuring accountability of industry and government, being a trusted advisor, having an ear to the ground, being a source of intel, being a bearer of solutions, facilitating collaboration and solving complex problems. Some of you have worked with us on a public liability insurance issue over the last year or so, and it's been, I think, a good example of the Commission bringing together the stakeholders to work through a challenging, complex issue, and ultimately actively engaging with communities to bring them along on the journey. There are some communities have been on the journey, but there's others where that journey is still to come. And ultimately, we're here to provide leadership and to facilitate an ongoing and respectful dialogue between industry and government and regional communities around cultivation of coexistence. So, in summary, today I've touched on how important the gas sector and agriculture sectors are in terms of their economic contribution, and how important coexistence and social licence is to maintaining that and delivering benefits. Briefly touched on how gas will continue to be an important part of our future and how that will mean, what will that mean for development. And we've examined some of the past experiences and learnings and some of the future challenges and opportunities, and put the GasFields Commission in the mix there in terms of our current role and our evolution and our work in partnership with you all. But I'd like to close just by bringing it back to the cultivation analogy again and just emphasising a point I made earlier. Coexistence, much like agriculture, is fickle. If we don't work hard, if we don't tend to our coexistence crop, we risk that failure. So we must continue to actively work in this space to cultivate coexistence so that we can ensure the continued prosperity of our agriculture and gas sectors and our regional communities. Thank you.